Hello, and how are you? I do hope that you're having a good day. Yeah, I do. Seriously. There's too much negative stuff going on at the moment, so it's good to actually look for a good day somewhere. Anyway, and if you're not having a good day, I hope that listening to some stories might just be a nice point in your day instead of having to focus on all those horrible other things that are going on in life at the moment, which we're all having to put up with in one way or another. Anyway, we have been reading Heidi by Johanna Spyri, and we have got the last two chapters of that today, and we shall see how that goes. What are we going to read next? I hear you asking. Fake. Yeah. What are we going to read next? Probably Just William, about a naughty little boy and the adventures he gets into. And it's written by a lady who I think didn't even have kids. Some people just understand what children are like. Probably it's in some ways it's probably a little bit like some of the mischief that the children, the Bastable children, got up to, but slightly different again. It's kind of like a cross between the Bastables and Millie Molly Mandy. Village life rather than city life, and just the one child in the family rather than a collection of them like you've got with the Bastables. Anyway, we'll see how that goes. And depending on how long it takes us today to read the two chapters that we've got, we may actually start it if I've got it on my tablet. If not, I'll be doing some clickety-clicking during the chapter breaks. Anyway, so for those of you who are new here, hi, I'm Jev and I read old-fashioned children's stories. I don't read them specifically for children, I read them for anyone who wants to listen, because it's great to actually have something that we can listen to and think about that comes from a different time and place to where we are currently living. Fiction is actually very good for the brain, and it's very good for the emotions, and it's very good for learning how to put ourselves in other people's shoes and think about them and be considerate of them, because we learn to look through another's eyes. And fiction is very, very good for that. They're actually finding lots of very good reasons for listening to fiction or reading fiction. So here we go. This is a way of starting it, if you haven't done it before. I grew up reading old-fashioned children's stories. I grew up reading books that my parents and my grandparents had read when they were children. So I'm very, very familiar with the type of stories that I've been reading here. I think all of them except for one I have actually read before, of the ones we've done so far, and we've done quite a few. Sorry, I'm looking sideways because I get ADHD, and sometimes to focus I have to actually look at something else instead of the person I'm talking to. So I'm talking about books. I know I'm talking about books. Sorry. I do hope some of you know enough about using Twitch to be able to clip some of our sillier moments, because that would make a great collection of bloopers and outtakes. Anyway, so yeah, clip away. I don't mind. So, old-fashioned children's books. Different time, different place. Most of the books that I read are actually English-based or British Isles-based, just because that's what I grew up with. I also grew up with a few of the Canadian ones, and for some strange reason, some Scandinavian ones. Not just Pippi Longstocking, probably not so much ones that I grew up reading when I was a kid, but ones that I was reading with my children. We had a number of old children's books that we enjoyed reading together, and they included, there was Pippi Longstocking, but we didn't actually read her, but we read other books by, I think, the same author, I'm not sure. The Emil books. Emil and the Soup Tureen was the first one that we had. He's a rascal. I'll see if I can find a copy, and I will see if I can read it to you sometime. Yeah, Emil is a good one to listen to. And also other ones like Flaxen Braids, about a family who I think had to move because of regional economic downturn, so therefore they moved to another region. But it's set in Norway or Sweden, I think. And so it's talking about life from a different time and place. Anyway, so I'm Jev and I read these sort of books just because, hey, why not? One of the things that I suggest is that you bring something to drink. I always have some water with me so I don't get too dehydrated. This is my drink bottle. That's why I'm waving it at you. Don't forget your water. Bring something to drink. Grab yourself something to snack on, because I'm usually reading for an hour, maybe an hour and a half, sometimes almost 2 hours. Well, there's chatting in between chapters as well. That's the other thing, is I chat between chapters. I don't chat while I'm reading, because some people want to listen to the story. Strange that. But yes, so you're welcome to chat amongst yourselves in the chat box alongside. Otherwise, comments and stuff, get them all queued up ready so that I can see them when we get to the chapter breaks. And if there's anything that I can answer or I can talk about that's to do with what you've been saying, then I will answer that. The chat is moderated a bit. There are some keyword blocks because we've had nasty people who've got disgusting minds. Then we don't need that here. I mean, that's why we're reading old-fashioned children's stories. As there's enough of that sort of thing in the world, we don't need it here as well. Something to drink, something to snack on, and somewhere comfortable to sit while you're listening. And it's quite okay. I expect you to be technically what they call lurkers, because I'm doing the reading and I'm not chatting while I'm reading. I will explain things along the way if I think that's appropriate, just because there are a lot of things that I am reading out loud which are very old-fashioned, which I'm very familiar with, my background, and I'm old. I mean, look at this grey hair. But also I'm very aware that a lot of other people don't have those things in their personal experience, and so we'll have some strange words sometimes. Sometimes it's a good idea actually to have a pen and paper. I've got my own pen and paper handy to write down anything that you're not sure about in case I don't explain it. Don't just rely on me to explain it, because some things are a bit odd. Look up places that are mentioned in stories. Find out about them. Have a look at pictures. Have a look at Google Maps with it on satellite mode, so you can actually see what places look like. The area of the book that the area of Switzerland where the book we're currently reading is set is actually quite mountainous, although in the valleys, in the valleys, the bottom of the valleys is flat, and then it goes along through the valley, and that's where they do all their normal regular farming with fences and stuff, and then it goes up into the hills. And the village that Heidi is based from is actually up in the hills, and then she lives in summertime now up further still in one of the old shepherd's huts, and then goes out to the fields sometimes with Peter and looks after the goats and all that sort of stuff. So it's really worth having a look and seeing what these landscapes are like where people's stories are set. The same with when we were reading Secret Garden. I had a look, I don't know if you did, but I had a look at the maps and I had a look at photographs of what it used to be like, and also what it's like now, of the Yorkshire moors. Unfortunately, it's just a very vague search for that particular book, because it wasn't set in one particular actual location. It was set in a general area. But it's been quite fun, actually. And so one of the ways you can find out a little bit more about things like that, or if you find out something and you think this is really interesting, even if you don't think other people are interested, share it. Come and share it over on our Discord server, which I'm going to type in for you here. Join the Discord server, and there's probably going to be some restrictions on how often you can post initially, or if you post a big string of emoticons, emojis, it may not let you straight away. Don't worry about that. Just take your time, get to know the place. And we're starting to actually set up channels for different books that we're reading. So you're welcome to come and share bits and pieces in there. So I'm going to say hi. Hi, Francis. Good to see you here. So good to have you here. And we've got various other people who will be popping in at different times, maybe not commenting, but lurking. I always think I'm talking to myself, even though I talk to you guys as if I'm actually talking to you guys. And then I find out afterwards that there's a whole lot of people who've been watching. They just didn't say anything, because you don't have to. That's cool. That's one of the good things about the way we can use the internet. So the other link, which I'm going to give you for another time. Yes, my keyboard is quite noisy through my microphone. Sorry about that. Eventually my office will be set up properly, and then you'll see a real space that I'm in instead of just a photo on a backdrop, which is done with the computer. So that link I've just given you is our YouTube channel. If you're watching this not when I'm reading it live, but in 2 weeks' time, you will be watching this on YouTube. I save the stories that I read on Twitch. I read them live on Twitch, which is when I end up being able to chat with people, which is why I like doing it that way. We don't do a lot of chatting, but it's fun to do anyway. And then I transfer the stories over to YouTube, and I put them into playlists so people can listen to a whole book if they want to. You can just listen to one video at a time. That's fine. But if you want to listen to a whole story, the books are sorted into playlists. So you've got all of The Secret Garden in one playlist. There are a couple of exceptions. Millie Molly Mandy, those stories were published. Each of the stories is a standalone story, but the stories were published across several books, and they're very, very short. So they're between 6 minutes and about 12, maybe 15 minutes each story maximum. And so therefore I've just put all of them into one playlist. And apparently they're still the most watched of my videos, but that's fine. They're really lovely. They're very sweet. They're a lot younger age group than most of the other stories that we listen to. And then the other one that we've got more than a slightly odd arrangement on it is the Alice stories. So that's Lewis Carroll's Alice's Adventures in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass. They're both in one playlist rather than two. I think probably because I read all of one book and then we finished partway through one afternoon's reading. We finished the book, and so we started the next one and just carried on. And so I've just packaged them all up together. There are a couple of times where I have finished a book during a live session, and we've started a new book after a bit of chat and all that sort of stuff. And when I then put them over on YouTube, I will actually split them so that you've got one book in its relevant playlist and the other book in the next playlist, rather than having them all combined in one video. Although here on Twitch, they will still be all part of one video, but I will retitle them if that's the case, so that people know that both those books are in that day's video. So yes, you've got 2 weeks to listen here on Discord before they disappear, but they don't disappear forever. They just migrate over to YouTube. So enough talking. I shall get on with reading. Sorry about that. Right, I'm reading Heidi by Johanna Spyri, and we are reading chapter 22, Wicked Peter and the Unlucky Chair. Oh dear. Peter's another one of those ones who doesn't always think ahead, really, does he? Anyway, Uncle went out early the next morning to see what kind of day it was going to be. There was a reddish gold light over the higher peaks. A light breeze was springing up, and the branches of the fir trees moved gently to and fro. The sun was on its way. He wheeled the chair out of the shed ready for the coming journey, because they'd arranged the day before that he was going to take Clara up the mountain when they went up to take the goats. Sorry, I'm just reminding myself as much as you. He wheeled the chair out of the shed ready for the coming journey, and then went in to call the children and tell them what a lovely sunrise it was. Peter came up the mountain at this moment. The goats did not gather round him so trustfully as usual. Peter's in a bit of a bad mood, and he has been ever since Clara came, but seemed to avoid him timidly, for he had reached a high pitch of anger and bitterness, and was using his stick very unnecessarily, and where it fell, the blow was no light one. For weeks now he had not had Heidi all to himself as formerly. When he came up in the morning, the invalid child was always already in her chair, and Heidi fully occupied with her. And it was the same thing over again when he came down in the evening. She had not come out with the goats once this summer, and today she was only coming in company with her friend and the chair, and would stick by the latter's side the whole time. It was the thought of this which was making him particularly cross this morning. There stood the chair on its high wheels. Peter glared at it as at an enemy that had done him harm and was likely to do him still more today. He glanced round. There was no sound anywhere, no one to see him. He sprang forward like a wild creature, caught hold of the chair, and gave it a violent and angry push in the direction of the slope. It rolled swiftly forward and in another minute had disappeared. And I'm going to show you the picture. Yes, I have a picture for that. There it is. There's Peter, naughty Peter, hiding behind the bush actually. And there's the chair and the blankets and stuff. The illustration doesn't really meet my expectations. You can see there's the houses of the village there and stuff like this. In my mind, this bit here, which is where the Alm uncle's shepherd's hut, where they live in summer, is much further up than just this short distance between the village here and where Peter is. Just because it might be exactly the way you imagine it, but it's not the way I imagine it, so there you go. Anyway, just because I've got to tell you this stuff, apparently, and my chair is rolling sideways, I'm just going to make sure I can see which other pictures. Oh yes, there is one more picture in the book. And I just needed to see what it was. I'm going to move my chair so it doesn't keep rolling sideways and backwards. It's a matter of lining up the wheels across instead of you go as far forward as you want and then you go sideways and then the wheels stay facing this way rather than wanting to go that way. Otherwise I end up going back there because I've got my feet up on something. It's much more comfortable. Anyway, now, it rolled swiftly forward and in another minute had disappeared. It's probably all broken down the mountainside. Peter had now sped up the mountain as if on wings, not pausing till he was well hidden behind a large blackberry bush, for he had no wish to be seen by Uncle. But he was anxious to see what had become of the chair, so he looked, and there he saw his enemy running faster and faster down the hill. Then it turned head over heels several times, and finally, after one great bound, rolled over and over to its complete destruction. The pieces flew in every direction, feet, arms, and torn fragments of the padded seat and bolster, and Peter experienced a feeling of such unbounded delight at the sight that he leapt in the air, laughing aloud and stamping for joy. He could see only good results for himself in the disaster to his enemy. Now Heidi's friend would be obliged to go away, for she would have no means of going about, and when Heidi was alone again, she would come out with him, as in the old days, and everything would go on in the proper way. But Peter did not consider, or did not know, that when we do a wrong thing, trouble is sure to follow. Heidi now came running out of the hut and round the shed. Grandfather was behind with Clara in his arms. The shed stood wide open, the two loose planks having been taken down, and it was quite light inside. The two loose planks is to make the doorway wider so Clara's chair can be pushed in and out. Heidi looked into every corner and ran from one end to the other, and then stood still, wondering what could have happened to the chair. Grandfather now came up. "How is this? Have you wheeled the chair away, Heidi?" "I have been looking everywhere for it, Grandfather. You said it was standing ready outside." And again she searched every corner of the shed with her eyes. At that moment, the wind, which had risen suddenly, blew open the shed door and sent it banging back against the wall. "It must have been the wind, Grandfather," exclaimed Heidi, and her eyes grew anxious at this sudden discovery. "Oh, if it has blown the chair all the way down to Dorfley, we shall not get it back in time, and shall not be able to go." "If it has rolled as far as that, it will never come back, for it is in 100 pieces by now," said the grandfather, going round the corner and looking down. "But it is a curious thing to have happened," he added as he thought over the matter, for the chair would have had to turn a corner before starting downhill. "Oh, I am sorry," lamented Clara, "for we shall not be able to go today, or perhaps any other day. I shall have to go home, I suppose, if I have no chair. Oh, I am so sorry. I am so sorry." but Heidi looked towards her grandfather with her usual expression of confidence. "Grandfather, you will be able to do something, won't you, so that it need not be as Clara says, and so that she is not obliged to go home?" "Well, for the present we will go up the mountain as we had arranged, and then later on we will see what can be done," he answered, much to the children's delight. He went indoors, carried out a pile of shawls, and laying them on the sunniest spot he could find, set Clara down upon them. Then he brought the children's morning milk and led out his 2 goats. "Why is Peter not here yet?" thought Uncle to himself, for Peter's whistle had not been sounded that morning. The grandfather then took Clara up on one arm and the shawls on the other. Now she's meant to be about 12 or 13, I think, so she's small because she doesn't have a lot of muscular strength, but also I think grandfather, because of his building work and working up on the mountainside and doing things like that, is probably a lot stronger than your average office worker. Sorry, just enjoying nearly the last of my coffee for the day. "Now then, we will start," he said. "The goats can come with us." Heidi was pleased at this and walked on after her grandfather with an arm over either of the goats' necks, and the animals were so overjoyed to have her again that they nearly squeezed her flat between them out of sheer affection. When they reached the spot where the goats usually pastured, they were surprised to find them already feeding there, climbing about the rocks, and Peter with them, lying his full length on the ground. "I'll teach you another time to go by like that, you lazy rascal. What do you mean by it?" Uncle called to him. Peter, recognizing the voice, jumped up like a shot. "No one was up," he answered. "Have you seen anything of the chair?" asked the grandfather. "Of what chair?" called Peter back in answer in a morose tone of voice. Uncle said no more. He spread the shawls on the sunny slope and, setting Clara down upon them, asked if she was comfortable. "As comfortable as in my chair," she said, thanking him. "And this seems the most beautiful spot. Oh, Heidi, it is lovely, it is lovely," she cried, looking round her with delight. The grandfather prepared to leave them. They would now be safe and happy together, he said, and when it was time for dinner, Heidi was to go and bring the bag from the shady hollow where he had put it. Peter was to get them as much milk as they wanted, but Heidi was to see that it was little swan's milk. He would come for them towards evening. He must now be off to see after the chair and find out what had become of it. The sky was dark blue, and not a single cloud was to be seen from one horizon to the other. The great snowfield overhead, that's further up the mountain, sparkled as if set with thousands and thousands of gold and silver stars. Have you seen that? Have you seen snow when it sparkles? It is quite intriguing if you're not used to it, but it's lovely. Now and again a young goat came and lay down beside them. Snowflake came oftenest, putting her little head down near Heidi, and only moving because another goat came and drove her away, and the goats had also grown familiar with Clara, and would rub their heads against her shoulder, which was always a sign of acquaintanceship and goodwill. Some hours went by, and Heidi began to think that she might just go over to the spot where all the flowers grew to see if they were fully blown and looking as lovely as the year before. Clara could not go until grandfather came back that evening, when the flowers probably would be already closed. The longing to go became stronger and stronger till Heidi felt she could not resist it. "Would you think me unkind, Clara?" she said rather hesitatingly. "If I left you for a few minutes, I could run there and back very quickly. I want to see how the flowers are looking, but wait." For an idea had come into Heidi's head. She ran and picked a bunch or two of green leaves, and then took hold of Snowflake and led her up to Clara. The green leaves were to encourage Snowflake. "There, now you will not be alone," said Heidi, giving the goat a little push to show her she was to lie down near Clara, which the animal quite understood. Heidi threw the leaves into Clara's lap, and the latter told her friend to go at once to look at the flowers, as she was quite happy to be left with the goat. She liked this new experience. Heidi ran off, and Clara began to hold out the leaves one by one to Snowflake, who snuggled up to her new friend in a confiding manner and slowly ate the leaves from her hand. She found a strange new pleasure in sitting all alone like this on the mountainside, her only companion a little goat that looked to her for protection. She suddenly felt a great desire to be her own mistress and to be able to help others instead of herself being always dependent, as she was now. Many thoughts unknown to her before came crowding into her mind, and a longing to go on living in the sunshine and to be doing something that would bring happiness to another, as now she was helping to make the goat happy. An unaccustomed feeling of joy took possession of her, as if everything she had ever known or felt became all at once more beautiful, and she seemed to see all things in a new light, and so strong was the sense of this new beauty and happiness that she threw her arms round the little goat's neck and exclaimed, "Oh, Snowflake, how delightful it is up here! If only I could stay on forever with you beside me." It's such a fresh realization for her that life can be so different. Heidi had meanwhile reached her field of flowers, and as she caught sight of it, she uttered a cry of joy. The whole ground in front of her was a mass of shimmering gold, where the cistus flowers spread their yellow blossoms. Above them waved whole bushes of the deep bluebell flowers. Heidi stood and gazed and drew in the delicious air. Suddenly she turned round and reached Clara's side, out of breath with running and excitement. "Oh, you must come," she called out as soon as she came in sight. "It is more beautiful than you can imagine, and perhaps this evening it may not be so lovely. I believe I could carry you. Don't you think I could?" Clara looked at her and shook her head. "Why, Heidi, what could you be thinking of? You are smaller than I am. Oh, if only I could walk." Heidi looked round as if in search of something. Some new idea had evidently come into her head. Peter was sitting up above, looking down on the two children. He had been sitting and staring before him in the same way for hours, as if he could not make out what he saw. He had destroyed the chair so that the friend might not be able to move anywhere, and that her visit might come to an end. And then, a little while after she had appeared right up here under his very nose, with Heidi beside her. He thought his eyes must deceive him, and yet there she was, and no mistake about it. Heidi looked up to where he was sitting and called out in a commanding voice, "Peter, come down here." "I do not wish to come," he called in reply. "But you must. I cannot do it alone, and you must come here and help me. Make haste and come down," she called again in an urgent voice. "I shall do nothing of the kind," was the answer. Heidi ran some way up the slope towards him, and then, pausing again, called, her eyes ablaze with anger, "If you don't come at once, Peter, I will do something to you that you won't like. I mean what I say." Peter felt an inward throe at these words, and a great fear seized him. He had done something wicked which he wanted no one to know about, and so far he had thought himself safe. But now Heidi spoke exactly as if she knew everything, and whatever she did know, she would tell her grandfather, and there was no one he feared so much as this latter person. Supposing he were to suspect what had happened about the chair? Peter's anguish of mind grew more acute. He stood up and went down to where Heidi was awaiting him. "I am coming, and you won't do what you said." Peter appeared now so submissive with fear that Heidi felt quite sorry for him and answered assuringly, "No, no, of course not. Come along with me. There's nothing to be afraid of in what I want you to do." As soon as they got to Clara, Heidi gave her orders. Peter was to take hold of her under the arms on one side and she on the other, and together they were to lift her up. This first movement was successfully carried through, but then came the difficulty. As Clara could not even stand, how were they to support her and get her along? Heidi was too small for her arm to serve Clara to lean upon. "You must put one arm well around my neck, so, and put the other through Peter's, and lean firmly upon it, and then we shall be able to carry you." Peter, however, had never given his arm to anyone in his life. Clara put hers in his, but he kept his own hanging down straight beside him like a stick. "That's not the way, Peter," said Heidi, in an authoritative voice. "You must put your arm out in the shape of a ring, and Clara must put hers through it and lean her weight upon you, and whatever you do, don't let your arm give way like that. Like that, I am sure we shall be able to manage." Peter did as he was told, but still they did not get on very well. Clara was not such a lightweight, and the team did not match very well in size. It was up one side and down the other, so that the supports were rather wobbly. Clara tried to use her own feet a little, but each time drew them back quickly. Because she's unused to having them on the ground, pressing on them, she's not used to the feeling of that, and so she might be frightened of that feel. Because she has never walked in her life. We don't know what was wrong when she was born, that she's never walked. Clara tried to use her own feet a little, but each time drew them quickly back. "Put your foot down firmly once," suggested Heidi. "I'm sure it will hurt you less after that." When you put some pressure on something so that it gets used to the feel, it can make a difference. "Do you think so?" said Clara hesitatingly, but she followed Heidi's advice and ventured one firm step on the ground and then another. She called out a little as she did it. Then she lifted her foot again and went on. "Oh, that was less painful already," she exclaimed joyfully. "Try again," said Heidi encouragingly, and Clara went on, putting one foot out after another, until all at once she called out, "I can do it, Heidi! Look, look! I can make proper steps!" And Heidi cried out with even greater delight, "Can you really make steps? Can you really walk? Really walk by yourself? Oh, if only Grandfather were here!" And she continued gleefully to exclaim, "You can walk now, Clara, you can walk." Clara still held on firmly to her supports, because she's not used to being upright and keeping her balance while she's walking. It's not just being able to put your feet on the ground, it's keeping the right balance. Clara still held on firmly to her supports, but with every step she felt safer on her feet, as all three became aware. And Heidi was beside herself with joy. "Now we shall be able to come up here together every day and just go where we like, and you will be able to walk about as I do and not have to be pushed in a chair, and will get quite strong and well. It is the greatest happiness we could have had." And Clara heartily agreed, for she could think of no greater joy in the world than to be strong and able to go about like other people, and no longer have to lie from day to day in her invalid chair. They had not far to go to reach the field of flowers, and could already catch sight of the sisters' flowers glowing gold in the sun. As they came to the bushes of the bluebell flowers, with sunny, inviting patches of warm ground between them, Clara said, "Can't we sit down here for a while?" This was just what Heidi enjoyed, and so the children sat down in the midst of the flowers, Clara for the first time on the dry, warm mountain grass, and she found it indescribably delightful. Everything was so lovely, and Heidi, who was beside her, sorry, I'm trying to get my glasses after having itched my nose. My eyelid. I'm trying to get my glasses to sit right, and now my hair is tickling me. Yes. And Heidi, who was beside her, thought she had never seen it so perfectly beautiful up here before. Then she suddenly remembered that Clara was cured. That was the crowning delight of all that made life so delightful in the midst of all this surrounding beauty. Clara sat, silent, overcome with the enchantment of all that her eye rested upon, and with the anticipation of all the happiness that was now before her. There seemed hardly any room in her heart for all her joyful emotions. Peter also lay among the flowers without moving or speaking, for he was fast asleep. The breeze came blowing softly and caressingly from behind the sheltering rocks and passed whisperingly through the bushes overhead. Heidi got up now and then to run about, for the flowers waving in the warm wind seemed to smell sweeter and to grow more thickly whichever way she went. So the hours went by. It was long past noon when a small troop of goats advanced solemnly toward the plain of flowers. It was not a feeding place of theirs, for they did not care to graze on flowers. They looked like an embassy arriving, with Greenfinch as their leader. They had evidently come in search of their companions who had left them in the lurch, and who had remained away so long, for the goats could tell the time without mistake. As soon as Greenfinch caught sight of the three missing friends amid the flowers, she set up an extra loud bleat, whereupon all the others joined in a chorus of bleats, and the whole company came trotting towards the children. Peter woke up, rubbing his eyes, for he had been dreaming that he saw the chair again, with its beautiful red padding, standing whole and uninjured before the grandfather's door. He experienced again the dreadful fear of mind that he had lost in this dream, of the uninjured chair. Even though Heidi had promised not to do anything, there still remained the lively dread that his deed might be found out in some other way. He allowed Heidi to do what she liked with him, for he was reduced to such a state of low spirits and meekness that he was ready to give his help to Clara without murmur or resistance. When all three had got back to their old quarters, that's where they first got to when they came up the mountain, Heidi ran and brought forward the bag and proceeded to fulfill her promise, for her threat of the morning had been concerned with Peter's dinner. Not what Peter thought it was. She had seen her grandfather putting in all sorts of good things and had been pleased to think of Peter having a large share of them, and she had meant him to understand when he refused at first to help her that he would get nothing for his dinner. But Peter's conscience had put another interpretation upon her words. Heidi took the food out of the bag and divided it into 3 portions, and each was of such a goodly size that she thought to herself, there will be plenty of hours left for him to have more still. She gave the other 2 their dinners and sat down with her own beside Clara, and they all 3 ate with a good appetite after their great exertions. Peter ate up every bit of food to the last crumb, but there was something wanting to his usual enjoyment of a good dinner, for every mouthful he swallowed seemed to choke him, and he felt something gnawing inside him. They were so late at their dinner that they had not long to wait after they had finished before grandfather came up to meet them. Heidi rushed forward to meet him as soon as he appeared, as she wanted to be the first to tell him the good news. She was so excited that she could hardly get her words out when she did get up to him, but he soon understood, and a look of extreme pleasure came to his face. He hastened up to where Clara was sitting and said with a cheerful smile, "So we've made the effort, have we, and won the day?" And I'm just going to show you an illustration from this version of the book, which is grandfather carrying Clara and Heidi trotting along behind. That's how they got up the mountain, and that's probably how they're getting down. Then he lifted her up and putting his left arm behind her and giving her his right to lean upon, made her walk a little way, which she did with less trembling and hesitation than before, now that she had such a strong arm around her. Heidi skipped along beside her in glee, and the grandfather looked too, as if some happiness had befallen him. "We must not overdo it," he said, taking Clara up in his arms. "It is high time we went home." So that's the picture that we just saw, was him going to carry her back down. "It is high time we went home," and he started off down the mountain path, for he was anxious to get her indoors that she might rest after her unusual fatigue. And that's a very good point. She's been doing something she's never done before, and it takes a lot more physical effort than what she's used to. So it does make sense for her to go back to somewhere where she can safely rest without it causing any problems. When Peter got to Dorfley that evening, he found a large group of people collected round a certain spot, pushing one another and looking over each other's shoulder in their eagerness to catch sight of something lying on the ground. Peter thought he should like to see it too, and poked and elbowed till he made his way through. There it lay, the thing he had wanted to see. Scattered about the grass were the remains of Clara's chair, part of the back and the middle bit, and enough of the red padding and the bright nails to show how magnificent the chair had been when it was entire. "I was here when the men passing When the men passed, carrying it up, said the baker, who was standing near Peter, "I'll bet anyone that it was worth $125 at least. I cannot think how such an accident could have happened." "Uncle said the wind might perhaps have done it," remarked one of the women. "It's a good job that no one but the wind did it," said the baker again, "or he might smart for it. No doubt the gentleman in Frankfurt, when he hears what has happened, will make inquiries about it. I'm glad for myself that I have not been seen up the mountain for a good 2 years, as suspicion is likely to fall on anyone who was up there at the time." Many more opinions were passed on the matter, but Peter had heard enough. He crept quietly away out of the crowd, then took to his heels and ran home as fast as he could, as if he thought someone was after him. The baker's words had filled him with fear and trembling. He was sure now that any day a constable might come over from Frankfurt and inquire about the destruction of the chair, and then everything would come out and he would be seized and carried off to Frankfurt and there put in prison. Constable. Policeman. You may not call them constables where you live. You might just call them cops, police. But that was a name that they were often called, a police constable. Yeah, it's actually a rank. But most of the village policemen, town policemen, are constables. He reached home in this disturbed state of mind. He would not open his mouth in reply to anything that was said to him. He would not eat his potatoes. All he did was creep off to bed as quickly as possible and hide under the bedclothes and groan. "Peter's been eating sorrel again and is evidently in pain by the way he's groaning," said his mother. "You must give him a little more bread to take with him and give him a bit of mine tomorrow," said the grandmother sympathizingly. As the children lay that night in bed, looking out at the stars, Heidi said, "I've been thinking all day what a happy thing it is that God does not give us what we ask for, even when we pray and pray and pray, if he knows there is something better for us." Have you felt like that? "Why do you ask me that tonight all of a sudden?" asked Clara. Sorry. "Because I prayed so hard when I was in Frankfurt that I might go home at once, and because I was not allowed to, I thought God had forgotten me. And now you see, if I had come away at first when I wanted to, you would never have come here and would never have got well." Clara had in her turn become thoughtful. "But Heidi," she began again, "in that case we ought never to pray for anything, as God always intends something better for us than we know or wish for." "You must not think it is like that, Clara," replied Heidi eagerly. "We must go on praying for everything so that God may know we do not forget that it all comes from him. If we forget God, then he lets us go our own way and we get into trouble." "How did you learn all that?" asked Clara. "Grandmamma explained it to me first of all," that's Clara's grandmother. "And then when it all happened just as she said, I knew it myself, and I think, Clara," she went on as she sat up in bed, "we ought certainly to thank God tonight that you can walk now and that he has made us so happy." "Yes, Heidi, I'm sure you are right, and I am glad you reminded me. I almost forgot my prayers for very joy." Both children said their prayers, and each thanked God in her own way for the blessing he had bestowed on Clara, who had for so long lain weak and ill. The next morning the grandfather suggested that they should now write to the grandmamma and ask her if she would not come and pay them a visit, as they had something new to show her. But the children had another plan in their heads, for they wanted to prepare a great surprise for grandmamma. Clara was first to have more practice in walking, so that she might be able to go a little way by herself. Above all things, grandmamma was not to have a hint of it. Yes, it's a very good point. If you've known anyone who's not been able to walk for a while, the muscle wastage, because you're not using those muscles, is tremendous. A good example is somebody who's broken their leg in the upper part of their leg and had the whole of them from their hips down to their ankle on that leg side in plaster, and then half of their other leg in plaster. Their other leg still gets some exercise, but the one that's been set in plaster from top to bottom, and they finally get that plaster off, there's almost, it looks comparatively like there's no muscles there, and they can do nothing like what they used to do before. just because they have to retrain and rebuild those muscles. So Clara doesn't even have that as a starting point. She's got muscles there, but they've never really been used, and so she's having to start from scratch. They're only there. They don't actually have strength. So she has to build the strength with exercise, with practicing, with doing it, with walking. And it will be very, very tiring. Building new muscles bigger muscles is tiring, very tiring. And it takes skill to walk. We don't realize how much skill it takes to walk because we're so used to it. But a little child learning to walk falls over a lot. And that's part of learning the skill, is learning how to balance yourself, using your feet to keep you so that you're upright without falling over if you're standing rather than walking, the right amount of push to move yourself forward, the right amount of push the other way to stop yourself. There's a lot of skill in it that we don't think about because we just do it. And Clara now has to learn all these things and build the muscles for it. So there you go. Anyway, above all things, Grandmama was not to have a hint of it. They asked the grandfather how long he thought this would take, and when he told them about a week or less, I'm guessing he's thinking because of their enthusiasm they will be working at it. They don't expect her to be perfectly good at it, but just to have enough skill to be able to walk a little bit on her own. When he told them about a week or less, they immediately sat down and wrote a pressing invitation to Grandmama, asking her to come soon, but no word was said about there being anything new to see. The following days were some of the most joyous that Clara had spent on the mountain. She awoke each morning with a happy voice within her crying, "I am well now, I am well now. I shan't have to go about in a chair. I can walk by myself like other people." Then came the walking, and every day she found it easier and was able to go a longer distance. The movement gave her such an appetite that the grandfather cut his bread and butter a little thicker each day and was well pleased to see it disappear. He brought out the foaming milk in a larger jug so he could fill the little bowls over and over again. And so another week went by, and the day came which was to bring Grandmama up the mountain for her second visit. And that is the end of that chapter. So I'm going to have a drink of water. You can chat away if you've got anything that you want to tell me about or ask me about. And hopefully I'll see it before I start reading again. Right. Oh, sorry, I've got these itchies going on. And I'm going to see if I can find a... Actually, no, I need to see if I've got it on the book on here. Sort by authors. No, it's not on there. Okay, so now I have to find it. So now we turn on the Wi-Fi on the tablet. So good that it still does that. Oops. I've got this upside down because of where the way the cover slumps when I have it leaning against something, which makes it a little bit quirky. The home button's at the top instead of at the bottom. Why are the words so little on the screen? It's not a particularly adaptive website, unfortunately. So I'm using Project Gutenberg. The website is this. I'll write it for you. Really simple. Really simple if I have the thing in the right place. And there it is. You might need to copy it and paste it somewhere to make it work. I'm not sure. And that's the other thing. I'm not used to, not really used to iProducts. And so therefore, on the keyboard, I'm used to swiping because I'm used to an Android phone and Android tablets. No, let's do a different sort of search. It's not quite the way I wanted to search for it. I'm frowning at the other screen because I'm trying to get the spelling right, otherwise it won't find it. Come on. Now I've got to wait for it. Back to backspace. C R. Yes, because it's not a fuzzy search on the Gutenberg page. There it is. There's the first one. And I shall download it so that I can. I'll see if I can find some pictures from it that I can show you on here. Right, yes, found some. And now my browser is being sluggish because I haven't used it very much recently. Put it in the right place so I can find it when I need it. Wait for the other picture to load. It's not very big, unfortunately. Right, back to there. And I need to get this saved onto this tablet so I can look at it. Right, done. I won't get the other ones from that series yet. I'll do that some other time because I've still got some more reading to do. No, don't go away. I just wanted to turn off. Technology. It's great when it works. When it's being sluggish, not so good. Okay, go back here and pick up the book that I really wanted to look at, which is currently Heidi. But I am going to see if I can put a picture here for you of the new book that we're going to read. Image. Now I have to find the location. Nearly there. At least I've got the right folder to find it. This is, except I have to put it somewhere else. Here it is. Oh, you can see it. Kind of. Here you go. This is the cover, one of the covers, of Just William. And I remember reading the Just William books when I was a little bit older than what they were intended for, but that's okay. And now I shall find the other picture that I also found of it. No, not that one, this one. And you will see what I mean when I say that William is a little bit of a rascal. I'm not quite sure what he's doing there, but I'm sure we'll find out when we read the story. So there you go. And I shall turn that picture off because it's distracting. We shall carry on with reading Heidi, shall we? But I just sort of thought, you know, because we've got all this rather serious stuff in Heidi where it's like, yeah, because a lot of that's one of the things about the earlier Victorian books is they get quite moralizing, where they're telling children how they ought to behave, and good things happen when you behave well and bad things happen when you don't behave well. And you'll find when we read the Just William stories that the author had a slightly different view on how the world actually ran. We'll look forward to that shortly. So I'm going to carry on reading. Hi, I'm Jev, and I'm reading Heidi by Johanna Spyri, This is chapter 23, Goodbye to the Beautiful Mountain. And it's the last chapter of Heidi. Okay, we'll carry on. Grandmama wrote the day before her arrival to let the children know that they might expect her without fail. Obviously, their mail works a lot faster than ours. Anyway, carrying on. Peter brought up the letter early the next morning. As he neared the group, his steps slackened, and the instant he had handed the letter to Uncle, he turned quickly away, as if frightened, and ran off up the mountain. "Grandfather," said Heidi, who had been watching him with astonished eyes, "why does Peter always behave now like the great Turk?" That's the billy goat. "When he thinks somebody is after him with a stick, he turns and shakes his head and goes off with a bound just like that." "Perhaps Peter fancies he sees the stick which he so well deserves coming after him," said the grandfather. Heidi set about tidying the hut, as Grandmama must find everything clean and in good order when she arrived. Clara looked on amused and interested to watch the busy Heidi at her work. Then the children dressed up and went and sat together outside on the seat ready to receive her. At last they saw the procession winding up the mountain just in the order they had expected. First there was the guide, then the white horse with Grandmama mounted upon it, and last of all the porter with a heavy bundle on his back, for Grandmama would not think of going up the mountain without a full supply of wraps and rugs, because in her mind's eye, because she's used to the city where there's heating everywhere if she needs it, the mountains can be quite dangerous and cold. Not all the time, but you never know. You have to be prepared. Nearer and nearer wound the procession. At last it reached the top, and Grandmama was there looking down on the children from her horse. She no sooner saw them, however, sitting side by side, than she began quickly dismounting as she cried out in a shocked tone of voice, Why is this? Why are you not lying in your chair, Clara? What are you all thinking about?" But even before she had got close to them, she threw up her hands in astonishment, exclaiming further, "Is it really you, dear child? Why, your cheeks have grown quite round and rosy. I should hardly have known you again." And she was hastening forward to embrace her when Heidi slipped down from the seat and, with Clara leaning on her shoulder, began walking along quite coolly and naturally. Then indeed Grandmama was surprised, or rather alarmed, for she thought at first it must be some unheard of proceeding of Heidi's, but no, Clara was actually walking steadily and uprightly beside Heidi. Laughing and crying, she ran to them and embraced first Clara, and then Heidi, and then Clara again, unable to speak for joy. All at once she caught sight of Uncle standing by the seat and looking on, smiling at the meeting. She went up to the old man and seized his hands. My dear Uncle, how much we have to thank you for. It is all your doing. It is your care and nursing." "And God's good sun and mountain air," he interrupted her, smiling. "And yes, and don't forget the beautiful milk I have," put in Clara. "Grandmama, you can't think what a quantity of goat's milk I drink, and how nice it is." That's because goat's milk very strongly reflects the type of food they eat, even more so than cow's milk. And also goat's milk has a lot of extra healthy things in it and doesn't have some of the things that bother some people that are in cow's milk. It's considered to be an extremely healthy milk, but it's not quite so easy to produce large quantities of as cow's milk. So that's why it's not the commonly used milk these days. I shall carry on. "Grandmama, you can't think what a quantity of goat's milk I drink and how nice it is." "I can see that by your cheeks, child," answered Grandmama. "I really should not have known you. You have grown quite strong and plump, and taller too. I never hoped or expected to see you look like that. I cannot take my eyes off you, for I can hardly yet believe it. But now I must telegraph without delay to my son in Paris and tell him he must come here at once. I shall not say why. It will be the greatest happiness he has ever known." Excuse me. "My dear Uncle, how can I send a telegram? Have you dismissed the men yet?" "They have gone," he answered, "but if you are in a hurry I will get Peter and he can take it for you." Grandmamma thanked him, for she was anxious that the good news should not be kept from her son a day longer than was possible. So Uncle went aside a little way and blew such a resounding whistle through his fingers that he awoke a responsive echo among the rocks far overhead. He did not have to wait many minutes before Peter came running down in answer, for he knew the sound of Uncle's whistle. Peter looked as white as a ghost, for he thought Uncle was sending for him to give him up, but instead he only gave him a written paper with instructions to take it down at once to the post office at Dorfley. Uncle would settle for the payment later, as it was not safe to give Peter too much to look after. Peter went off with the paper in his hand, feeling some relief of mind for the present, for as Uncle had not whistled for him in order to give him up, it was evident that no policeman had yet arrived. So now they all sat down in peace to their dinner, round the table in front of the hut, and Grandmamma was given a detailed account of all that had taken place, how Grandfather had made Clara first try to stand, and then move her feet a little every day, and how they had settled for the day's excursion up the mountain, and the chair had been blown away, how Clara's desire to see the flowers had induced her to take the first walk, and so by degrees one thing had led to another. The recital took some time, for Grandmamma continually interrupted it with fresh exclamations of surprise and thankfulness. It hardly seems possible. I can scarcely believe it is not all a dream. Are we really awake? And are we all sitting here by the mountain hut? And is that round-faced, healthy-looking child my poor little white, sickly Clara? And Clara and Heidi could not get over their delight at the success of the surprise they had so carefully arranged for the Grandmamma, and at the latter's continued astonishment. Meanwhile, Mr. Sesamon, who had finished his business in Paris, had also been preparing a surprise. Without saying a word to his mother, he got into the train one sunny morning and travelled that day to Basel, B-A-S-L-E, not P. The next morning he continued his journey, for a great longing had seized him to see his little daughter from whom he had been separated the whole summer. He arrived at Regatz a few hours after his mother had left. When he heard that she had that very day started for the mountain, he immediately hired a carriage and drove as far as Dorfley, and then started to climb the mountain. He went on and on, but still no hut came in sight. And yet he knew there was one where Peter lived halfway up, for the path had been described to him over and over again. He began to wonder if he was on the right path, and whether the hut lay perhaps on the other side of the mountain. He looked round to see if anyone was in sight of whom he could ask the way, but far and wide there was not a soul to be seen nor a sound to be heard. Only at moments the mountain wind whistled through the air, and the insects hummed in the sunshine, or a happy bird sang out from the branches of a solitary larch tree. Mr. Sesamon stood still for a while to let the cool alpine wind blow on his hot face, because he's tramping up this mountainside, so he will get rather warm, because you don't usually walk like that in the city. Mr. Sesamon stood still for a while to let the cool alpine wind blow on his hot face, but now someone came running down the mountainside. It was Peter, with the telegram in his hand. He ran straight down the steep slope, not following the path on which Mr. Sesamon was standing. As soon as the latter caught sight of him, he beckoned him to come. Peter advanced towards him, slowly and timidly, with a sort of sidelong movement, as if he could only move one leg properly and had to drag the other after him. "Hurry up, lad," he called, and when Peter was near enough, "Tell me," he said, "is this the way to the hut where the old man and the child Heidi live, and where the visitors from Frankfurt are staying?" A low sound of fear was the only answer he received, as Peter turned to run away in such precipitous haste that he fell head over heels several times and went rolling and bumping down the slope in involuntary bounds, just in the same way as the chair, only that Peter fortunately did not fall to pieces as that had done. Only the telegram came to grief, and that was torn into fragments and blew away. How extraordinarily timid these mountain dwellers are, thought Mr. Sesamon to himself, for he quite believed that it was the sight of a stranger that had made such an impression on this unsophisticated child of the mountains. After watching Peter's violent descent towards the valley for a few minutes, he continued his journey. Peter, meanwhile, with all his efforts, could not stop himself, but went rolling on and still tumbling head over heels at intervals in a most remarkable manner. Just checking my pictures again. Sorry. Pretty sure. Yeah. Although it doesn't quite look appropriate. It looks more like someone doing a handstand, but here's the picture for this chapter. And there you go. I'm thinking that that's Mr. Sesamon up the top there, and that this is Peter here. Part of his tumble on the way. Obviously put his hands out to brace himself, and then flopped over the top and carried on down the hill. I don't know, something like that. That'll do for now. But this was not the most terrible part of his sufferings at the moment, for far worse was the fear and horror that possessed him, feeling sure as he did now that the policeman had really come over for him from Frankfurt. He had no doubt at all that the stranger who had asked him the way was the very man himself. Just as he had rolled to the edge of the last high slope above Dorfley, he was caught in a bush, and at last able to keep himself from falling any further. He lay still for a second or two to recover himself and to think over matters. "Well done! Another of you come bumping along like this," said a voice close to Peter. "And which of you tomorrow is the wind going to send rolling down like a badly sown sack of potatoes?" It was the baker, who stood there laughing. He had been strolling out to refresh himself after his hot day's work, and had watched with amusement as he saw Peter come rolling over and over in much the same way as the chair. Peter was on his feet in a moment. He had received a fresh shock. Without once looking behind him, he began hurrying up the slope again. He would have liked best to go home and creep into bed, so as to hide himself, for he felt safest up there. But he had left the goats up above, and Uncle had given him strict injunctions to make haste back, so that they might not be left alone too long. And he stood more in awe of Uncle than anyone, and he would not have dared to disobey him on any account. There was no help for it. He had to go back, and Peter went on groaning and limping. He could run no more, for the anguish of mind he had been through and the bumping and shaking he had received were beginning to tell upon him, and so with lagging steps and groans he slowly made his way up the mountain. Shortly after meeting Peter, Mr. Sesamon passed the first hut, and so was satisfied that he was on the right path. So that's probably Peter's hut. He continued his climb with renewed courage, and at last, after a long and exhausting walk, he came in sight of his goal. There, only a little distance farther up, stood the grandfather's home, with the dark tops of the fir trees waving above its roof. Mr. Sesamon was delighted to have come to the last steep bit of his journey. In another minute or two he would be with his little daughter, and he pleased himself with the thought of her surprise. But the company above had seen his approaching figure and recognized who it was, and they were preparing something he little expected as a surprise on their part. As he stepped onto the space in front of the hut, two figures came towards him. One, a tall girl with fair hair and pink cheeks, leaning on Heidi, whose dark eyes danced with joy. Mr. Sesamon suddenly stopped, staring at the two children, and all at once the tears started to his eyes. What memories arose in his heart! Just so had Clara's mother looked, the fair-haired girl with the delicate pink and white complexion. He did not know if he was awake or dreaming. "Don't you know me, Papa?" called Clara to him, her face beaming with happiness. "Am I so altered since you saw me?" Then the father ran to his child and clasped her in his arms. Yes, you are indeed altered. How is it possible? Is it true what I see? And the delighted man stepped back to look full at her again and to make sure that the picture would not vanish before his eyes. Are you my little Clara, really my little Clara? He kept on saying. Then he clasped her in his arms again and again put her away from him. So he hugged her tight and then he held her out from himself so he could see her again. And then put her away and again put her away from him that he might look and make sure it was she who stood before him. Then Grandmamma came up, anxious for a sight of her son's happy face. Well, what do you have to say now, dear son? She exclaimed. You have given us a pleasant surprise, but it is nothing in comparison to what we have prepared for you, you must confess. And she gave her son an affectionate kiss as she spoke. But now, she went on, you must come and pay your respects to Uncle, who is our chief benefactor. Yes, indeed, and our little Heidi too, said Mr. Sesamon, shaking Heidi by the hand. Well, are you quite well and happy in your mountain home? Because the last time he had seen her, she had been very unwell, and the doctor was worried she was going to die in Frankfurt because she was so homesick. Are you quite happy and well and happy in your mountain home? But I need not ask. No alpine rose could look more blooming. I am glad, child. It is a pleasure to me to see you so. And Heidi looked up with equal pleasure into his kind face. How good he had always been to her, and that he should find such happiness awaiting him up here on the mountain made her heart beat with gladness. Grandmamma introduced him to Uncle, and while the two men were shaking hands and Mr. Sesamon was expressing his heartfelt thanks and boundless astonishment to the old man, Grandmamma wandered round the back to see the old fir trees again. Here another unexpected sight met her gaze, for there under the trees stood a great bush of the most wonderful dark blue gentians, as fresh and shining as if they were growing on the spot. And I'm going to find you a picture of them. I'm sorry, I am going to interrupt this gentian. It has a strong blue from what I remember. In fact, it's so well known for the blue that there's a colour called gentian blue. Come on, come on, come on. Let's see if we can find the right picture, because there's a whole lot of different pictures and they don't look like they're all related. And I will give you a picture. Slow computer. I am going to get that's what I thought. I am going to get my office space sorted out, and as part of that, I am going to have a replacement computer, which used to be my son's computer. He does some pretty intense gaming, so it's very well built, but the only reason he's not using that one now is because there's another one he wanted even more that he built himself. Come on, wake up. Open image and new tab. Save image. And it's much more powerful than this one. The one I'm currently using is his previous old one, and the reason I'm using it is because he wanted to be able to use a virtual reality headset, and this one was not really up to the job. And so he had another one built for him, and then since then he has actually gone ahead and much more recently built himself a new one, which is a really, really cool computer. But it does mean that I'm going to get this other one, his not quite so old one. And it's much more powerful than this one. It's got a lot more RAM, it's got a lot more computing power and all these other things. And this means that it shall work quite well. So I will move this picture. You can see just how blue these flowers are. This is Gentian. It's not a particularly good picture of it at that scale, but these are Gentians. And they grow particularly well on alpine situations. They don't grow so well in the sort of place that I live because we have salty air, because we're by the sea. We don't get the cold. They're probably a type of plant that likes the cold in winter and then the warmth in summer. We don't get that cold. In fact, we were talking about it yesterday. I think we had 2 frosts this last winter, and they were barely frosts. They coloured the front paddock over our fence. We're next to a park which has a paddock in it that the donkeys live in. And they coloured the grass of the paddock white, and then about an hour later it was all melted again, and usually it lasts 2 or 3 hours before it does that, unless the sun's directly shining on it. So that just shows it wasn't very cold last winter at all, this winter we've just had. So there you go, that's Gentian. This is a very, very strongly coloured flower, which is what the grandmama has just seen around the corner. And I shall get back to this. Here another unexpected sight met her gaze, for there under the trees stood a great bush of the most wonderful dark blue gentians, as fresh and shining as if they were growing on the spot. "How exquisite! What a lovely sight!" she exclaimed. "Heidi, dearest child, come here. Is it you who have prepared this pleasure for me? It is perfectly wonderful." I'm sorry, I'm just itchy. The children ran up. Don't forget Heidi's still helping with keeping Clara's balance. No, I did not put them there," said Heidi, "but I know who did. They grow just like that on the mountain, Grandmama, only if anything they looked more beautiful still," Clara put in. "But guess who brought those down today?" And as she spoke, she gave such a pleased smile that the grandmother thought for a moment the child herself must have gathered them. But that was hardly possible. At this moment, a slight rustling was heard behind the fir trees. It was Peter who had just arrived. He had made a long round, trying to slip by unobserved. But Grandmama had seen him and recognized him, and suddenly the thought struck her that it might be Peter who had brought the flowers, and that he was now trying to get away unseen, feeling shy about it. But she could not let him go off like that. He must have some little reward. "Come along, boy, come here. Do not be afraid," she called to him. Peter stood still, petrified with fear. After all he had gone through that day, he felt he had no longer any power of resistance left. All he could think was, "It's all up with me now." Every hair on his head stood on end, and he stepped forth from behind the fir trees, his face pale. "Courage, boy," said Grandmama in her effort to dispel his shyness. "Tell me now, straight without hesitation, was it you who did it?" Ambiguous. She doesn't realize how ambiguous that question is. Peter did not lift his eyes, and therefore did not see at what Grandmama was pointing. But he knew that Uncle was standing at the corner of the hut, fixing him with his grey eyes, while beside him stood the most terrible person that Peter could conceive, the police constable from Frankfurt. Quaking in every limb and with trembling lips, he muttered a low yes. "Well, and what is there dreadful about that?" said Grandmama. Because it is all broken to pieces, and no one can put it together again." Peter brought out his words with difficulty, and his knees knocked together so that he could hardly stand. Grandmama went up to Uncle. "Is that poor boy a little out of his mind?" she asked sympathizingly. "Not in the least," Uncle assured her. "It is only that he was the wind that sent the chair rolling down the slope, and he is expecting his well-deserved punishment." Grandmama found this hard to believe, for in her opinion Peter did not look an entirely bad boy, nor could he have had any reason for destroying such a necessary thing as the chair. but Uncle had only given expression to the suspicion that he had had from the moment the accident happened. The angry looks which Peter had from the beginning cast at Clara, and the other signs of his dislike to what had been taking place on the mountain, had not escaped Uncle's eye. Putting two and two together, he had come to the right conclusion as to the cause of the disaster, and he therefore spoke without hesitation. When he accused Peter, the lady broke out into lively expostulations on hearing this. "No, no, dear uncle, we will not punish the poor boy any further. One must be fair to him. Here are all these strangers from Frankfurt who come and carry away Heidi, his one sole possession, and a possession well worth having too, and he is left to sit alone all day after day for weeks, with nothing to do but brood over his wrongs. No, no, let us be fair to him. His anger got the upper hand and drove him to an act of revenge, a foolish one, I own. But then we all behave foolishly when we are angry." And saying this, she went back to Peter, who still stood frightened and trembling. She sat down on the seat under the fir trees and called him to her kindly. "Come here, boy, and stand in front of me, for I have something to say to you. Leave off shaking and trembling, for I want you to listen to me. You sent the chair rolling down the mountain so that it was broken to pieces. That was a very wrong thing to do, as you yourself knew very well at the time, and you also knew that you deserved to be punished for it. But be sure of this, Peter, that those who do wrong make a mistake when they think no one knows anything about it. For God sees and hears everything, and when the wicked doer tries to hide what he has done, then God wakes up the little watchman that he places inside us all when we are born, and who sleeps on quietly till we do something wrong. And the little watchman has a small goad in his hand, and when he wakes up he keeps on pricking us with it, so that we have not a moment's peace. And the watchman torments us still further, for he keeps on calling out, 'Now you will be found out. Now they will drag you off to punishment.' And so we pass our life in fear and trouble, and never know a moment's happiness or peace. Have you not felt something like that lately, Peter?" Peter gave a contrite nod of the head, as one who knew all about it, for Grandmamma had described his own feelings exactly. "And you calculated wrongly also in another way," continued Grandmamma, "for you see the harm you intended has turned out for the best for those who you wished to hurt. As Clara had no chair to go in and yet wanted so much to see the flowers, she made the effort to walk. And every day since she has been walking better and better. Do not forget my words, and whenever you feel inclined to do anything wrong, think of the little watchman inside you with his goad and his disagreeable voice. Will you remember all this?" "Yes, I will," answered Peter, still very subdued, for he did not yet know how the matter was going to end, as the police constable was still standing with Uncle. Sorry, itchy nose. And that's the windows downstairs, doors being shut. That's why it's squeaking. Goad. Who knows what a goad is? You hear the phrase to be goaded into something. A goad is a stick with pointy bits on the end for prodding at the back end of animals to make them move, so that they try and get out of the way of the sharp thing that's poking at them. That's what a goad is. Look it up. G-O-A-D. "Right, that's right, and now the thing is over and done for," said Grandmamma. "But I should like you to have something for a pleasant reminder of the visitors from Frankfurt. Can you tell me anything that you have wished very much to have? What would you like best as a present?" Peter lifted his head at this and stared open-eyed at Grandmamma. Up to the last minute he had been expecting something dreadful to happen, and now he might have anything that he wanted. His mind seemed all of a whirl. "I mean what I say," went on Grandmamma. "You shall choose what you like to have as a remembrance from the Frankfurt visitors, and as a token that they will not think any more of the wrong thing you did. Now do you understand me, boy?" The fact began at last to dawn upon Peter's mind that he had no further punishment to fear, and that the kind lady, sitting in front of him, had delivered him from the police constable. He suddenly felt as if the weight of a mountain had fallen off him. He had also by this time awakened to the further conviction that it was better to make a full confession at once of anything he had done wrong or had left undone, and so he said, "And I lost the paper too." Grandmamma had to consider a moment what he meant, but soon realised his connection with her telegram and answered kindly, "You are a good boy to tell me. Never conceal anything you have done wrong. Then all will come right again. And now what would you like me to give you?" Peter grew almost giddy with the thought that he could have anything in the world that he wished for. He had a vision of the yearly fair at Mayenfeld, with the glittering booths and all the lovely things that he had stood gazing at for hours without a hope of ever possessing one of them, for Peter's purse never held more than 5 cents, and all these fascinating objects cost double that amount. There were the pretty little red whistles that he could use to call his goats, and the splendid knives with rounded handles, known as toad strikers, with which one could do such fine whittling. That's one to look up, a toad striker style knife. Never heard of that one before, apart from in the book, obviously. Toad striker knife. See what you can find out and go and share it on our Discord server. If you're watching this on YouTube, I have a link for our Discord server there too, so have a look. Peter remained pondering. He was trying to think which of these 2 desirable objects he should like best to have, and found it difficult to decide. Then a bright thought occurred to him. He would then be able to think over the matter between now and next year's fair. "A dime," answered Peter, who was no longer in doubt. Now, I'm sorry, but I don't think that's the original word that was used here. I think this has been translated by an American. And so it would probably be a shilling. A dime is the equivalent, is 10 cents. A nickel is 5 cents, and a dime is 10 cents in American terminology. A sixpence is 6 pennies, which is the equivalent, not value equivalent, but coinage equivalent of a 5-cent piece, like a nickel. And a shilling is 12 pennies, but the new version was old pennies. The decimal version is 10 pennies, which is the equivalent of a dime. So I think he asked for a shilling, if it was in English, not American. But I don't know what it was in Swiss German, what the currency was. Grandmamma could not help laughing. "That is not an extravagant request. Come here then." And she pulled out her purse and put 4 bright silver dollars in his hand. I have no idea now. We've totally got me lost on the coinage here. I'm going to have to look at another version of the book to find out what they're talking about. Oh, okay. And put 4 bright silver dollars in his hand and then laid some dimes on top of them. "We will settle our accounts at once," she continued, "and I will explain them to you. I have given you as many dimes as there are weeks in the year." 52. "And so every Sunday throughout the year you can take out a dime to spend." "As long as I live?" asked Peter quite innocently. Grandmamma laughed still more at this, and the men, hearing her, paused in their talk to listen to what was going on. "Yes, boy, you shall have it all your life. I will put it down in my will. Do you hear, my son? And you are to put it down in yours as well. A dime a week, as long as to Peter, as long as he lives." Mr. Sesamon nodded his assent and joined in the laughter. Peter looked again at the present in his hand to make sure he was not dreaming, and then said, "Thank God!" And then he went off running and leaping with more even than his usual agility, and this time managed to keep his feet, for it was not fear but joy such as he had never known before in his life that now sent him flying up the mountain. All trouble and trembling had disappeared, and he was to have a dime every week for life. Later, after dinner, when the party was sitting together chatting, Clara drew her father a little aside and said with an eagerness that had been unknown to the little tired invalid, "Oh, Papa, if you only knew all that grandfather has done for me from day to day. I cannot reckon his kindness, but I shall never forget them as long as I live." Kindnesses. That's right, because originally she was going to come up during the day and then they were going to stay. Sorry. Oh, why is my nose so itchy? Originally, they were going to stay in Dorfley and then she was going to come up the mountain, further up the mountain, to spend the day with Heidi when she was staying there. That was the original plan, and that's probably what Papa originally heard. Oh, Papa, if you only knew all that grandfather had done for me from day to day, because he was doing the caretaking. I cannot reckon his kindnesses, but I shall never forget them as long as I live, and I keep on thinking what I could do for him or what present I could make him that would give him half as much pleasure as he has given me. That is just what I wish most myself, Clara, replied her father, whose face grew happier each time he looked at his little daughter. I have been also thinking how we best can show our gratitude to our good benefactor. Mr. Sesamon went over to Uncle and taking him by the hand said, "Dear friend, you will believe me when I tell you that I have known no real happiness for years past. What good were money and property to me when they were unable to make my poor child well and happy? With the help of God, you have made her whole and strong, and you have given me new life, and you have given new life not only to her, but to me. Tell me now, in what way can I show my gratitude to you? I can never repay all you have done, but whatever is in my power to do is at your service. Speak, friend, and tell me, what can I do?" Uncle had listened to him quietly with a smile of pleasure on his face as he looked at the happy father. "Mr. Sesamon," he replied in his dignified way, "I too have my share in the joy of your daughter's recovery, and my trouble is well repaid by it. I thank you heartily for all you have said, but I have need of nothing. I have enough for myself and the child, as long as I live. Of course, I am growing old and shall not be here much longer. I have nothing to leave the child when I die. If you could promise me that Heidi will never have to earn her living among strangers, then you would richly reward me for all I have done for your child." Remember Heidi's aunt, his niece. She has to go and work for strangers. That's how Heidi ended up going to Frankfurt. So he's thinking of that sort of thing, that as long as she never has to go away from here and work for people she doesn't know. "You would richly reward me for all I have done for your child." "There could never be any question of such a thing as that, my dear friend," said Mr. Sesamon quickly. "I look upon the child as my own. Ask my mother, my daughter. You may be sure that they will never allow the child to be left in anyone else's care. But if it will make you happier, I give you here my hand upon it. I promise you, Heidi shall never have to go and earn her living among strangers. I will make provision against this, both during my life and after. But now I have something else to say. Independent of her circumstances, the child is totally unfitted to live a life away from home. We found that out when she was with us, but she has made friends, and among them I know one who is at this moment in Frankfurt. He is winding up his affairs there, that he may be free to go where he likes and take his rest. I am speaking of my friend, the doctor, who came over here in the autumn and who, having well considered your advice, intends to settle in this neighbourhood, for he has never felt so well and happy anywhere as in the company of you and Heidi. So you see the child will henceforth have two protectors near her, and may they both live long to share the task." I'm thinking the doctor is a little younger than the grandfather, so she will still have somebody who will care for her once the grandfather eventually dies of old age, which will be how it happens. But I don't think that's in this book. Anyway, carrying on. "God grant it indeed may be so," added Grandmamma, shaking Uncle's hand warmly as she spoke, to show how sincerely she echoed her son's wish. Then putting her arm round Heidi, who was standing near, she drew the child to her. "And I have a question to ask you too, dear Heidi. Tell me if there is anything you particularly wish for." "Yes, there is," answered Heidi promptly, looking up delightedly at Grandmamma. "Then tell me at once, dear, What it is? I want to have the bed I slept in at Frankfurt with the high pillows and thick coverlid, and then grandmother will not have to lie with her head downhill and hardly able to breathe, and she will be warm enough under the coverlid not to have to wear her shawl in bed to prevent her freezing to death. In her eagerness to obtain what she had set her heart upon, Heidi hardly gave herself time to get out all she had to say, and did not pause for breath till she reached the end of her sentence. "Dearest child," answered Grandmamma, moved by Heidi's speech, "what is this you tell me of grandmother? You are right to remind me. In the midst of our own happiness, we forget too often that which we ought to remember before all things. When God has shown us some special mercy, we should think at once of those who are denied so many things. I will telegraph to Frankfurt at once. Miss Rottermeier shall pack up the bed this very day, and it will be here in 2 days' time. God willing, grandmother shall soon be sleeping comfortably upon it." Heidi skipped round Grandmamma in her glee, and then stopping all of a sudden said quickly, "I must make haste down and tell her." "No, no, Heidi. What can you be thinking of?" said her grandfather reprovingly. "You can't be running backwards and forwards like that when you have visitors." But Grandmamma interfered on Heidi's behalf. "The child is not so far wrong, uncle," she said, "and poor grandmother has too long been deprived of Heidi for our sakes. Let us all go down to her together. I believe my horse is waiting for me, and I can ride down there from here. And as soon as I get to Dorfli, the message shall be sent off. What do you think of my plan, son?" Mr. Sesamon had not yet had time to speak of his travelling plans, so he begged his mother to wait a few moments that he might tell her what he proposed doing. Mr. Sesamon had been arranging that he and his mother should make a little tour in Switzerland, first ascertaining if Clara was in a fit state to go some part of the way with them. But now he would have the full enjoyment of his daughter's company, and that being so, he did not want to miss any of these beautiful days of later summer, but to start at once on the journey that he now looked forward to with such additional pleasure. And so he proposed that they should spend the night in Dorfli, and that next day he should come and get Clara, and that they would all three go down to Regatz and make that their starting point. Clara was rather upset at first at the thought of saying goodbye like this to the mountain. She could not help being pleased, however, at the prospect of another journey, and no time was allowed her to give way to lamentation, because she's not done a lot of travelling because of her ill health, remember? Grandmamma had already taken Heidi by the hand, preparatory to leading the way, when she suddenly turned. "But what is to become of Clara?" she asked, remembering all at once that the child could not yet take so long a walk. She gave a nod of satisfaction as she saw that uncle had already taken Clara up in his arms and was following her with sturdy strides. Mr. Sesamon brought up the rear, and so they all started down the mountain. Heidi kept jumping for joy as she and Mrs. Sesamon walked along side by side, and Grandmamma asked all about Peter's grandmother, how she lived and what she did, especially in the winter when it was so cold. And Heidi gave her a minute account of everything, for she knew all that went on at grandmother's, and told her how the old woman sat crouching in her corner and trembling with cold. So Heidi's not telling her for sympathy, she's just speaking from her observations. She's not seeking to get anything more for them. She's just sharing because of her love for these different people in her life. She was also able to give her exact particulars of what grandmother had and had not to eat. Grandmamma listened with interest and sympathy until they came to grandmother's. Brigitte was just hanging out Peter's second shirt in the sun, so that he might have it ready to put on when he had worn the other long enough. As soon as she saw the company approaching, she rushed indoors. "The whole party of them are just going past, mother, evidently all returning home again," she informed the old woman. "Uncle is with them, carrying the sick child." "Alas, is it really to be so, then?" sighed the grandmother. "And you saw Heidi with them? Then they are taking her away. If only she could come and put her hand in mine again. If I could but hear her voice once more." At this moment the door flew open and Heidi sprang across to the corner and threw her arms around grandmother. Grandmother, grandmother, my bed is to be sent from Frankfurt with all the 3 pillows and the thick coverlid. Grandmamma says it will be here in 2 days. Heidi could not get out her words quickly enough, for she was impatient to see grandmother's great joy at the news. The latter smiled, but said a little sadly, "She must indeed be a good, kind lady, and I ought to be glad to think she is taking you with her, but I shall not outlive it long." "What is this I hear? Who's been telling my good grandmother such tales?" exclaimed a kindly voice. And grandmother felt her hand taken and warmly pressed, for grandmamma had followed Heidi in and heard all that was said. "No, no, there is no thought of such a thing. Heidi is going to stay with you and make you happy. We want to see her again, but we shall come to her. We hope to pay a visit to the Elm every year, for we have good cause to offer up especial thanks to God upon this spot where so great a miracle has been wrought upon our child." Then grandmother's face was lighted up with genuine happiness, and she pressed Mrs. Sesamon's hand over and over again, unable to speak her thanks, while 2 large tears of joy rolled down her aged cheeks. I'm guessing she's quite a lot older than grandmamma. And Heidi saw the glad change come over grandmother's face, and she too now was entirely happy. She clung to the old woman, saying, "Hasn't it all come about, grandmother, just like the hymn I read to you last time? Isn't the bed from Frankfurt sent to make you well?" "Yes, Heidi, and many, many other good things too, which God has sent me," said the grandmother, deeply moved. "I did not think it possible that there were so many kind people ready to trouble themselves about a poor old woman and to do so much for her. Nothing strengthens our belief in a kind Heavenly Father who never forgets even the least of his creatures so much as to know that there are such people full of goodness and pity for a poor useless creature such as I am." "My good grandmother," said Mrs. Sesamon, interrupting her, "we are all equally poor and helpless in the eyes of God, and all have equal need that he should not forget us. But now we must say good-bye, but only till we meet again, for when we pay our next year's visit to the Elm, you will be the first person we shall come and see. Meanwhile, we shall not forget you." And Mrs. Sesamon took grandmother's hand again and shook it in farewell. Yes, she would be the first, because they go past her house to get Heidi's. But grandmother would not let her off even then without more words of gratitude, and without calling down on her benefactress all belonging to her, every blessing that God had to bestow. At last Mr. Sesamon and his mother were able to continue their journey downward, while Uncle carried Clara back home with Heidi beside him, so full of joy of what was coming for grandmother that every step was a jump. But there were many tears shed the following morning by the departing Clara, who wept to say goodbye to the beautiful mountain home where she had been happier than ever before in her life. Heidi did her best to comfort her. "Summer will be here again in no time," she said, "and then you will come again, and it will be nicer still, for you will be able to walk about from the beginning. We can then go out every day with the goats up to where the flowers grow and enjoy ourselves from the moment you arrive." Mr. Sesamon had come as arranged to take his little daughter away, and was just now standing and talking with Uncle, for they had much to say to one another. Clara felt somewhat consoled by Heidi's words, and wiped away her tears. "Be sure to say good-bye to Peter and the goats, and especially to little Swan. I wish I could give little Swan a present, for she has helped so much to make me strong." "Well, you can if you like," replied Heidi. "Send her a little salt. You know how she likes to lick some out of grandfather's hand when she comes home at night." Clara was delighted at this idea. "Oh, then I shall send 100 pounds of salt from Frankfurt, for I want her to have something as a remembrance of me." Mr. Sesamon now beckoned to the children as it was time to be off. Grandmamma's white horse had been brought up for Clara, as she was no longer obliged to be carried in a chair. Heidi ran to the far edge of the slope and continued to wave her hand to Clara until the last glimpse of horse and rider had disappeared. And now the bed has arrived and grandmother is sleeping. Sorry, I should have said there's a slight pause there in the book. And now the bed has arrived and grandmother is sleeping so soundly all night that she is sure to grow stronger. Grandmamma Sesamum, moreover, has not forgotten how cold the winter is on the mountain. She has sent a large parcel of warm clothing of every description, so that the blind grandmother can wrap herself round and round, and will certainly not tremble with cold now as she sits in her corner. There is a great deal of building going on at Dorfley. The doctor has arrived, and for the present is occupying his old quarters. His friends have advised him to buy the old house that Uncle and Heidi live in during the winter. The doctor is having this part of the old house rebuilt for himself, the other part being repaired for Uncle and Heidi, for the doctor is aware that Uncle is a man of independent spirit, who likes to have a house to himself. Quite at the back, I'm just trying to make sense of a sentence. Quite at the back, a warm and well-walled stall is being put up for the 2 goats, and there they will pass the winter in comfort. The 2 men are becoming better friends every day, and as they walk about the new buildings to see how they are getting on, their thoughts continually turn to Heidi, for the chief pleasure to each in connection with the house is that they will have the light-hearted little child with them there. "Dear friend," said the doctor on one of these occasions as they were standing together, "you will see this matter in the same light as I do, I am sure. I share your happiness in the child as if, next to you, I was the one to whom she most closely belonged, but I wish also to share all responsibilities concerning her, and to do my best for the child. I shall then feel I have my rights in her, and shall look forward to her being with me and caring for me in my old age, which is the one great wish of my heart. She will have the same claims upon me as if she were my own child, and I shall provide for her as such, and so we shall be able to leave her without anxiety when the day comes that you and I must go." Uncle did not speak, but he clasped the doctor's hand in his, and his good friend could read in the old man's eyes how greatly moved he was and how glad and grateful he felt. So what the doctor is suggesting is that basically he adopts Heidi, so that legally, that's the itchy nose. Yes, I did talk to the cat earlier on today. So that legally she is his daughter, which means that she then is legally entitled to inherit anything of the doctor's when he dies. And that is a way of taking care of her, is making sure that those things are available. Because the grandfather is quite a bit older than the doctor. So the grandfather is likely to die, and rather than her being left on her own, she will actually still have the doctor living in the village that she can then be with. And as he ages, she can be with him and care for him. And then when he dies, she will be an adult and she will have whatever she has inherited. So, whatever. There you go. I think. And so thankfully, the grandfather wasn't offended by this. Heidi and Peter were at this moment sitting with grandmother, and the one had so much to relate and the others to listen that they all 3 got closer and closer to one another, hardly able to breathe in their eagerness not to miss a word. And how much there was to tell of all the events that had taken place that last summer, for they had not had many opportunities of meeting since then, because Heidi's been looking after Clara. And it was difficult to say which of the 3 looked the happiest at being together again, and at the recollection of all the wonderful things that had happened. Mother Brigitte's face was perhaps the happiest of all, as now, with the help of Heidi's explanation, she was able to understand for the first time the history of Peter's weekly dime for life, shilling for life. Then at last, because Peter's mother, Brigitte, has always had to worry about money ever since she's been looking after grandmother and Peter on her own. Then at last the grandmother spoke. "Heidi, read me one of the hymns. I feel I can do nothing for the remainder of my life, but thank the Father in heaven for all his mercies, all the mercies he has shown us." And that's the end of the book. And I'm going to show you the last shot, which is of Heidi waving to Clara and her father as they as they head off down the mountain to go on their travels. So they will see each other again, lots every year. And also the doctor's going to be living in Dorfley and having the fresh air and feeling a lot better about everything. So I was hoping that I was going to actually read you some of Just William, but I had not realised that in this book it actually marks the chapter break correctly and ends the chapter on the numbering before it starts the transcriber's notes for the ebook. All the other ones haven't had that. So when it says 44 pages till the end, it actually means that there's maybe 20 pages of book left, and then there's 24 pages of notes about the transcription to do with who did it and who spell checked it and who edited it, and there were these strange things in parts of it that we had to change and correct and stuff like that. All that sort of acknowledgement. I'm just looking quickly to see if they're talking anywhere about, no, it's about rights and usage. I was wondering if they were going to mention the money. No, it's because it's a public domain book. That's all the information is about. Anyway, so I was hoping to read you a little bit of Just William, which is quite another flavour. Quite another flavour indeed, because Just William is definitely not the sort of book where you are hearing about hymns and learning from them quite the same way. But we're going to enjoy the book anyway. And it will be a little bit less moralising probably. I think William will probably learn the things he needs to learn, but with less of somebody telling him what's appropriate behaviour and what isn't appropriate behaviour. So there you go. That is today's story. We have finished reading Heidi. Goodness me, so much happened, and they got it all resolved in the end. Okay, yes, old grandmother is still blind, but you can't fix everything. And in those days, they didn't have the surgery skills and other issues, other things that they could fix things like that with. And hi, extremely laggy PC, welcome. I'm going to finish reading now, and we'll see you next time. And if you're going to be watching me live, that will probably be on Friday. Today's Wednesday. It'll probably be on Friday the 19th of November. And hopefully I'll have some more birthday cake between now and then, because it's my birthday this month, and because I celebrate my birthday online differently to in real life. So I try to do something special for myself when I can, to remember that it's my birthday. Hey, I'm allowed to have something special. So this week I got myself an ice cream cake from the supermarket. I couldn't get one previously this month because our local supermarket has been rearranging things and refurbishing, and so the freezers were put in a temporary place with not as many, and they didn't have all their stock, including ice cream cakes. So I've got an ice cream cake for my birthday, and I've already had some, and it's yummy. It's just ice cream with a couple of little bits of chocolate in it, because it's a Freddo Frog one, because they don't make grown-up ladies ones. They make them for kids. But who says we can't enjoy them? It's ice cream. Anyway, so go and enjoy your week, the rest of it, whatever it is that you've got going. Look for something to enjoy, even if you have a terrible week. Look for something that lifts your heart. I won't moralise. Look for something that lifts your heart and helps you to have hope. And share that with other people. The hope, the things that lift your heart, whatever. Doesn't matter. We'll see you next time. Bye.